Good morning. It's hard to believe that next week is Holy Week. This coming Sunday is Palm Sunday. This season has gone fast. It's a strange time, and so things are different. And last week I went up to North Dakota and visited family, and actually it's a couple weeks ago now, and arrived home a week ago Monday. There's an old adage that comes from a 1940s Thomas Wolfe novel that states, "You can never go home again." And the saying is meant to infer how nostalgia often causes us to view the past in overly positive light. We look back at history and those are the greatest of times. And how humans tend to remember people and places from our upbringing in very static terms and very specific and very positive terms. Well, last week I was up in Minot, and that's the town where Grace and I lived for our first 2 years after we got married. Last Sunday, I attended church at the Glenburn Baptist Church, where Grace and I were married 40 years ago. My dad was serving as interim pastor at that congregation at that time. And then we traveled over to Williston, which is kind of the heart of the Bakken oil, and it was a time of reminiscing, first of all, looking at the oil field and seeing all the equipment and the huge, tremendous growth of that city, but also driving around the old neighborhood where I lived from age 4 to age 9, and how everything looked so different, and yet there were still glimmers of memory that brought back specific reminders. And then, of course, from age 9 until I graduated from high school, the town of Stanley, where that has doubled in size since I was in high school, simply because of the oil boom. Everything looked smaller. Have you ever noticed that when you go back and visit your childhood, you walk through the house that you grew up in, and everything, all the bedrooms look smaller, and the house looks smaller, the yard looks smaller, and the neighborhood looks smaller. And you go from place to place and you go, wow, it seemed like it was a big distance, and it's such a small area. Stories from the past come back to our memories as we go to those places. Everything looks different, and not at all in the way that I pictured it in my memories. Israel was set on a path looking ahead. I'm reading right now through the Bible, and I'm in Deuteronomy and Numbers, and those books where the commands were given to Moses and the people before they entered the Promised Land. And Israel was set on a path of looking ahead, going into the Promised Land. And yet, at the same time, they kept wanting to look back. Oh, remember back when we were in Egypt and we had houses to live in, and remember when we were in Egypt and we had all the food that we wanted to eat, and now we're stuck eating manna, and we don't have any meat in our diet. So Moses arranges with God to bring quail to the people, and God brings quail so the people can have meat, and pretty soon they're complaining about that as well, and on it goes. Remember when we were in Egypt. And so for the next 40 years, because of their complaining, because of their sin, they were forced to, for 40 years, to wander through the wilderness. It was a punishment for their complaining. Eventually they crossed the Jordan, and they were never to look back again once they crossed the Jordan. Although they were commanded one thing to do, several things to do, but one in particular, and that was to celebrate the Passover every year. And that was a time of looking back. Not looking back at how nice their homes were or how good the food was, but rather looking back at how God carried them through the most difficult times. That God brought them out of slavery, brought them across the Red Sea, brought them into the wilderness, and eventually into the Promised Land. The Passover is a time of remembering, of actually going back in the memories. Now, in this pandemic, we have been trying to figure out how to move ahead. I'm one of those pastors, among many pastors, who are not really sure at this point how to move ahead, when to move ahead, or in what manner we should do it. It's been an experience of learning for pastors and for congregations how to adapt to new realities. Where do we go from here? Do we go back to the way we were doing it before? Well, yes and no. Yes, we go back to worship. We go back to gathering together. We go back to being God's people gathered together. But I would say, no, we don't go back. That God has a new place for us to go. Just like God brought together the people of Israel, and then he brought them to the promised land, we have a new place. We have a new reality that we're heading forward. Whether we like it or not, it's a new reality. And what do we learn? And I think this is a time of discernment for us as a congregation. We're entering a new phase of our church's ministry. It's a time of finding the new normal, as people have been apt to say lately, and living according to God's plan of where we are traveling to in the future. We're no longer stuck on the east side of the Jordan, looking and wondering what the promised land would be like, but rather we're filled with opportunity as we cross that Jordan, cross into the new reality, and follow God's direction. Now, as we enter into the promised land of our own future, we may find some giants. We might find some obstacles, some huge armies that we have to confront. But nevertheless, we're there to follow God's direction, and God is going to walk with us as we discover that new reality. I look forward to seeing where God is leading us. I look forward to no longer being comfortable with the status quo. I look forward to seeing where God might bring us as a church congregation, as we serve the community, as we serve God's kingdom here in this place. May God go with you. I look forward to seeing where God is leading. Are you willing, and are you excited too, where God is going to lead us? Amen.